Pair of runoff elections in Georgia, they're going to happen tomorrow now. It determines which party controls the U.S. Senate for the next 2 years. And with the stakes that high, President-elect Joe Biden is heading to Georgia today. So is President Donald Trump, who is contesting the election in Georgia and elsewhere. Let's bring in a former state Senate President, Mike Haridopolos, to talk more about this. Mike, good to see you. Hope you had a good weekend.
We did, Ryan. Good morning to you.
So a lot of talk about this. You know, since November 3rd, we've been talking about the runoff. We've already seen record number of vote early. So who do you think come Wednesday morning will have control, and will we know by Wednesday morning?
Well, let's all hope they can count the votes a little bit quicker this time around. It's been a remarkable race in Georgia, as we've discussed over the last few weeks. It's anticipated at least $1 billion will be spent on these two Senate races, which are running neck and neck at this point. There's been record turnout for votes already. Nearly 3 million votes have already been cast at this point. And most experts believe that the Democrats have the upper hand on early votes, and the Republicans will need a big turnout on election day in order to make up that ground that's been kind of established by this point by the Democrats.
Mike, there was a lot of talk, of course, about the mail-in ballots and scrutiny over signatures. Will we see any different way of determining that than we saw in November, do you think?
Well, I think without doubt they're not going to have this late night situation like they did in Atlanta this time with the so-called broken pipe, pulling votes out of the bottom of tables, etc. I think literally the eyes of the world will be on this race because, as we discussed before, Ryan, this will literally decide the direction I think that Congress will take. As most people know, yesterday the new members of Congress were sworn in. There is a new Congress in session. Nancy Pelosi is once again the Speaker of the House. The question is, who will run the Senate? The Democrats under Chuck Schumer, or Republicans continue to keep control with Mitch McConnell, who was just reelected out of Kentucky? I think if you'll see a Democrat victory, you'll see a big progressive push. That's what they've been pushing for the last 4 years. That means most likely higher taxes, maybe some changes to the gun law, maybe an expansion of Obamacare, you name it. Of course, Paris climate accords. It will decide. A lot of people are also talking about the bipartisanship, meaning that if you have a Republican controlling the Senate, you'll have a lot more bipartisan deals as opposed to one-size-fits-all Democrats running both sides. That's what's at stake, and that's why I think this race is so important. And in my guesstimation, this will literally come down to a few thousand votes, or who decide who will win the race in Georgia.
Mike, another huge story in Washington is going to take place the next day on the 6th when a number of lawmakers, about a dozen now, are going to object to the election results for the Electoral College. What's your take on that, and where does this go?
Yes, at this point, there's at least 11 Republican senators who will object. This was led by Josh Hawley, a senator out of Missouri. Now 10 other U.S. senators are going to object to the results based on some of the information that's come out after the election, some of the irregularities, etc. And it's also anticipated over 100 Republicans will object in the House of Representatives, including a majority of those here in Florida. And so it will be a very chaotic day on January 6th when this takes place. It will put a lot of pressure on Mike Pence and say, how will he rule? Which electors will he pick? Republicans are leaning on the race from back in 1876, where there's a lot of voting irregularities, including the state of Florida back that year when Rutherford B. Hayes beat Samuel Tilden. I don't anticipate something changing on January 6th, but you're going to see a lot of consternation, a lot of finger pointing, but it'll most likely decide, more importantly, what happens in Georgia. That's going to be the determining factor, what direction our nation takes over the next 2 years.
Yeah, a couple dramatic days in Washington, across the country for sure. We'll keep an eye on. Mike, we'll talk to you also at 8:30. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Ryan. Have a great day, my friend.
All right, Mike, thanks.